What's up, everybody? You are listening to the Rebel by Design Wrestling Podcast, brought to you by HustleJet ENT. I am your host, Star Recliner 83, and you are listening to episode number 18. Now, this episode is going to be a kind of a controversial topic, but a topic that every true wrestling fan would need to discuss and talk about. And I want to make a lot of things perfectly clear before I go deep dive into this. We are going to talk about the passing of the one and only immortal Hulk Hogan, which I know has been on the minds of a lot of wrestling fans for the last almost 2 weeks now. And at the same time, it is a very complex and controversial topic to discuss, depending who you are as a person. Now, on this episode, I cannot tell you how to feel, and you can't tell me how to feel. And on the same token, everybody is feeling a certain way about the topic. Now, for me, I wanted to make a few things perfectly clear about myself. I was never a big Hulk Hogan fan. I was never considered a Hulkamaniac, even though when I became a fan of professional wrestling, it was towards closer to the end of the prime years of Hulkamania, which was the early 90s. The first event I ever watched from start to finish was WrestleMania 6, which happened in 1990. And so, being that back in those days, the only other way to really watch wrestling was going to that wasn't happening in that week. To watch past episode wrestling, you had to go to the video store to rent a video, whether it was a Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, the local grocery store, etc. That was the only way you can watch any previous events. And obviously, you can never really watch it in order. It's based on what was actually available to rent. So, watching all the previous WrestleManias from 1 through 5, the Royal Rumbles, the Survivor Series, the SummerSlams, and etc. that happened when it was just the big 4 pay-per-views at the time. Everything else was best of tapes. Whether it was a Rampage World Tour video or it was a best of WWF volume insert number here, or whether it was an NWA show that was or WCW show, depending on what was there and what year it was from. That's how I got started getting into wrestling in the beginning before watching the weekly television shows. So being that said, the lighting is not great for some reason today. I want to express my true feelings about the Hulk Hogan situation. I cannot deny the impact Hulk Hogan had made to professional wrestling. Nor do I I cannot deny that Hulk Hogan is one of the all-time greatest of all time. For most people, and a lot of people in a truthful fashion, the Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling, if you put into a person who is the greatest of all time, Hulk Hogan should be on most people's list, and is on most people's list. But it also depends on your taste. In fact, but when it comes to who made the most money and or impact to the actual wrestling industry, Hogan is definitely on that list or on that mountain. Even though a lot of people will say Hulk Hogan, quote, made wrestling, which is not a true statement. Hogan helped make wrestling mainstream. That is a true statement. Because you cannot deny that people like Bruno Sammartino was selling out Madison Square Garden all the time in the territory days. And a lot of people within the territory days made and drew big attendance in their respective territories. That cannot be denied and should not be denied as well. Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania took wrestling to a whole different direction, killing off the territories in the process by making WWF a worldwide traveling company that didn't stick to a territory but went all over the place. And Hulk Hogan was the flag bearer of that ship, or the captain of that or of that ship, if you will. But acknowledging and appreciating those accomplishments, oh, tongue tied there, sorry. We also cannot ignore the controversy Dark Cloud that is over his actual legacy. With obviously the remarks that were made during that tape that we all know about, the lies he has told to media and various interviews of things that he claimed that he was a big part of that he really wasn't. Those things leave a dark cloud over the legacy. And I'm not saying that because I'm perfect or haven't said something that I wish I didn't say. I'm not saying that at all. Hogan was not a perfect human being. The man behind the Hulk Hogan character, Terry, was not a perfect human being. You have to be foolish to not acknowledge that aspect as well. That's what makes it a very touchy, controversial subject as a whole, is because there are, two truths to the same story of who the person was. Hulk Hogan was a role model to a lot of people, and he did a lot of right to for a lot of kids over the years. No denying that. But he has also rubbed people the wrong way at the same time and done questionable things at the same time. And that also cannot be ignored. Can't ignore how certain people have felt about Hulk Hogan because of just the comments alone that have hurt a lot of people. And you cannot tell those people who feel the way they do how they should feel because you are not in that shoe. Tyrell Magnus put out a video regarding the topic itself, and he hit it on the nail on the head. And I highly do, he's a YouTuber if you don't know. He covers a lot of different things, anything from wrestling to controversial politics stuff to entertainment as a whole, whether it's anime, comic book stuff, movies, and a mixed bag of bones. And a guy I truly enjoy. And in a lot of ways, he feels the same way that I feel. In the sense of not ignoring either side, both the good and the bad. And what outweighs what is kind of where the controversy starts. And depending on who you are as an individual, that's where that line is drawn. For me personally, I know what Hulk Hogan said and did was absolutely wrong. And what made it more wrong to me was he never formally apologized about it. He only apologized for getting caught. And that was rubbed a lot of people over the years the wrong way. Certain wrestling personalities and talent felt the same way about that for a number of years. Some have offered him help to try to say, hey, you're fucking up. Let me help you try to right the ship. Use the language. But those were his words, right? That were being used in the conversation. Um, and he did not take him up on the offer. And that's something that you gotta think about. Now, the same people that were a part of that same conversation, they have said what they said about Hogan as well, and they honored the legacy of who he was as Hulk Hogan, and the impact he made to the wrestling industry, that's where a lot of people are wanting to focus on, and kind of should, but at the same time, you can't just pretend like the other stuff did not happen, because it did. And not to speak on political or religion on this, because that's not something that I really tried to not to focus on. But his political beliefs rub people the wrong way. His actions have rubbed people the wrong way. And if they feel the way they feel, they have every single right to do so. Now, on this podcast episode, I'm not going to do a deep dive on how exactly how I felt about the man, because I know the people who do listen to this will say, well, they will say their piece in the way they want to say it. And you have all the right to the world to say whatever you want to say, but you know what? My opinions and my views are exactly that. You can agree with them, you can disagree with them. But only one person, if as a believer, only one person could truly judge where Hogan lies in the afterlife, in that realm, so to speak. Because people have said, and Tyrone Magnus, brought this topic up to himself. Yeah, people have told him, well, toward the end of his life, he became a born again Christian, and he found God. So all that should be, his past should kind of be forgiven, which is not a true thing. Just because you found God doesn't make you a great person. It's all the actions and all the things you've done that makes you that. That you truly show the world that you are a changed person. That's where it really matters more than anything else. Because I have met Tyrone Magnus, talked about it too. We both come across people who claim to be a person of the church, and would continue to say the wrong things, continue to say, pretend, say things that that was screwed up and wrong. It doesn't make you perfect, in a sense. And judging by the different relationships Hogan had with different people that were once close to him, no longer were. Some that were close to him still were. It was a very big back and forth in that. But going more on a more positive approach, because I spoke on this on a live stream before, on the week of when it happened. Hogan did have, an impactful, to me as a wrestling fan. Like I said, I wasn't a big fan of his, but I cannot ignore that there were matches and moments that he was a part of that didn't have an everlasting effect on things that I would go back and watch over and over again. Obviously, I was, peak in the middle of the Monday Night Wars. Obviously, Hulk Hogan being a part of the NWO had a big impact, right? As do a lot of people who were watching at that time. I can't deny all the stuff he did in WWF at the time. That's what it was called before it became WWE. Going back and watching a lot of stuff there was a lot of stuff there that he was a part of that I did enjoy to a degree. Yeah, he was in the ring with a lot of my guys I really liked, like the Pipers and Macho Mans and so forth, but he was still involved in that in a big way. And of course, as during the Monday Night Wars where he was in the NWO, obviously, he was being the bad guy. It was really easy for me to hate the guy because I wasn't a big fan of him in the first place. So I was, of course, glued into wanting to see somebody kick the crap out of him. Whether it was Sting, Luger, DDP, or whoever, or Piper, especially Piper, at that time. During that time, it was really easy to hate Hulk Hogan because I wasn't a fan of him in the first place. And plus, he was playing the bad guy heel. Obviously, I wanted to see him get his butt kicked. So, but at the same time, as I grew older, when he came back to WWE and had that match with The Rock at WrestleMania 18, I cannot deny how magical that moment in that match was. I can't. As somebody who was a Rock fan, and understanding what that match meant as far as history goes, being that you have the biggest star of the 80s and early 90s to on a mainstream level versus the biggest star of the 2000s at the mainstream level, and that was who The Rock was at the time. Because The Rock was doing like a lot of things that Hogan was doing. He was hosting SNL. He was putting out movies. He was a mega star in the WWE, one of the most popular talents. People could argue who was more popular at that in 2000 between The Rock and Austin. Their pops were equally as humongous during that time frame, especially when they're both in the babyface role. Hogan was, and nobody was selling merchandise and stuff at the levels of Hogan was, besides those two in the history of wrestling for the longest time. So to understand that aspect of things and wonder why WrestleMania 18 new versus the old generation versus the new generation, so to speak, of mega stars flashing, how special of a moment that was. Cannot deny it. Cannot. And that's the match that stands out to anything else that happened during that run that Hogan had in the early 2000s in WWF or / WWE. Because remember, at the time, the transition of the name happened in the middle of that. So that was the one thing that stood out in the entire run. Hogan versus Vince was a moment, and stuff like that. But like that was the thing that stood out the most in that run. And I would say that the Rock versus Hogan match at WrestleMania probably would be my favorite match that Hogan was involved in for me. Now I did like the match. Not saying that I didn't like anything else he did. Because I'm going to talk about that more now because I'm kind of trying to make this more of a, for the remainder of this episode, a more of a positive vibe on Hulk Hogan because I don't want to be so negative, so to speak. That makes sense to everybody else because I already admitted that I wasn't a big Hogan fan, And I should feel a different way about the situation than I actually do, because had that dark cloud not been there, I think more people will be mourning the loss of Hogan way more than they are currently or have been. But that dark cloud obviously played a crucial impact of how a lot of us are truly feeling about the passing. But I wanted to show, so for the remainder of this episode, I want to focus more on the positives. So, Hogan versus The Rock, WrestleMania 18, for me, is my favorite Hulk Hogan match. Was it the? Now I know that that's just a personal taste in me. Um, Not denying that there were other matches in the past that should be on the list, because I'd still go back and watch Hogan and Andre, knowing how impactful that WrestleMania 3 was, and more so that match itself was. I understand it as a non-Hogan fan. I still understand it, and gone back and watched it and relived the moment. Um, I always liked the stuff he had with Macho Man. As a Macho Man fan, you know, he was obviously involved in those things, both WWE and WCW. You know, people, I like. I used to love the Hogan Warrior match. So but again, it's one of those things that as time went on, the Warrior kind of killed it for me as time went on, because for so many years until right before he passed away, he was not a really he was like not a person a well-liked person to a lot of people, and he also said a lot of more controversial things than Hogan ever did. And for a while, it was kind of like blackballed for for a number of years because of that. That we didn't see the Warrior in a lot of different things, very much at all, except for finally we got in Legends of Wrestling and stuff like that, and the classic series of Jack started putting figures of him out, and then later on still getting them from Mantel, but like there was a period of time where like nobody really wanted anything to do with him, and on social media, on YouTube, putting out crazy videos, calling out people, trying to expose certain people, including Hogan, for a while, talking a lot of crap. Um, Went on a tour, went to a college and spoken again. Same wore very controversial, not good comments to those people. And again, a lot of people held that against him for so many years, and in a lot of ways, rightfully so. So that match kind of got ruined for me because of the hard to separate who they were as people and who they in the character at times. It is hard to do. Some people do it better than others, and I'm one of the people that try very hard to do so, but I just cannot ignore the bad in a way. Um, there were a lot of things that I expected more of about Hogan over the years as well. Mainly stuff like '98 when the Wolfpack uh, were a separate entity to the NWO, Black and White. I was one of those people who was hoping to see a Hogan versus Nash 1-on-1 in that time frame. I expected that to happen, but I never really actually did until it was way too late. Not saying talk about the finger poker dude, by the way. I'm talking about it was like late it was summer '99 when they finally had their actual clash. It was what it was. Um I understood the importance of when Hogan and Ric Flair had their first bout at Bash at the Beach '94, which also was like the launch of the actual event, Bash at the Beach, before it was called Beach Blast, if you remember. Um, I understood the importance of that match, but as time went on, the more I hated it, or hated Hogan versus Flair. Because as big of a match as should be, the fact that Hogan always dominated Flair every single time as years went on didn't sit well with me. Because for the longest time, Flair became one of Hogan's punching bags. And I really didn't care for that, even though I really wanted to enjoy their matches. And the early ones I enjoyed more than the later ones, for obvious reasons. Because the later ones kind of got a little more silly. But the earlier ones, especially the very first one they had on pay-per-view in WCW, probably was their best. And I know it was supposed to be a thing for WrestleMania 8, then it all got changed because of a house show, whatever. It was what it was. Um, but at the same time, like people talk about how Hogan didn't make put people over, which that was what the best part of '92 was about it. Hogan was he was doing that. Like he lost to The Rock. He actually, as Red and Yellow Hogan, tapped out to Kurt Angle. You know, passed down, bleed from the mouth to help really establish Brock Lesnar as a monster. Like he was doing a lot of good in that time frame. But then, all of a sudden after that run ended, where he became more sporadic appearance post 1994, 2004, excuse me. I don't know why I say 94. Um, that's when he stopped. He became hey, I got a must-win situation. Even though I still, to this day, believe that Randy Orton should have beat him at SummerSlam. Being that he was, not having a rematch, was not going to be there after that match for a number of years. He had two bad knees at the time, and Orton was the rising star, so it made more sense. Especially that being that was Hogan's last actual WWF match, or WWE match. Before he, went to TNA, where he actually had his official final matches. But, like, just knowing that now, I just felt like that should have been Randy's moment there. Um, People say what they want about the Shawn Michaels match at SummerSlam. I look at it like this: did Shawn Michaels oversell? Absolutely yes. But at the same time, looking back on the match, as crazy as it sounds, I felt it made that match better. Because knowing the fact that at that time, Hogan was limited at what he could do in the ring at that point. He had the bad knees and hips. And now his back was still was going still. He was having back surgery not long, a couple years later from that. So Hogan was not very mobile at that time. So I feel like Shawn Michaels doing what he did, did in a weird way, did cover up what Hogan was limited to do. So saying that as well is like, okay, stuff that I really enjoyed from Hogan more than anything was his run in Japan. Because Hulk Hogan was a different performer in Japan. Because what we saw Hulk Hogan in America versus Hulk Hogan in Japan are like two completely different people. And one of the things that Hulk Hogan really also knew, in a way, as far as the performer goes, he knew what his audience wanted. So in WWF, WWE, Hulk Hogan was a certain style that he could get away with because it worked. But he knew the same style he could not get away with in Japan. Because Japan was always at the time, and always still is, more focused on the work rate. And Hulk Hogan really had to, show those fans that yeah, he can do that, and he was able to do that, and he did it. He had a match with Great Muta. He had a tag team match with teaming with Muta against LOD, among others. And even in his later years of his career, um, after his WWE run that ended in 03, uh, he had that match with that was, with Chono. And again, Hogan showed that he still could actually wrestle decently a man his age and as beat up as he was. Now that match happened before that match happened, and apparently Hogan supposedly got injured in that match, which led to Hogan not going to TNA in 03. Supposed to have this big match with Jeff Jarrett for the NWA World's title. Kind of makes you wonder what would have happened if that did happen for TNA as a company at the time. As a very young company. Makes you kind of wonder a little bit, what kind of impact that would have made. Because that was still during the time of the weekly pay-per-views that TNA was doing as replacement of TV without having a TV deal. Because that TV deal doesn't happen until 04. That in mind. Does make you wonder though. So after that, Hogan, was not seen in matches, until he had a one-off match with So because of that, Hogan didn't have a match until 05. He didn't do anything in 2004. You know, so he took over a year off, about a year and a half. We think about it, he didn't come back until 05 SummerSlam. Where he fought Michaels. And then he came, had that run with Michaels where he wrestled a couple of matches on television as well as another pay-per-view where he teamed with Michaels to take on Muhammad Hassan and Davari. Disappeared again. Came back to face Orton. Disappeared again. Fought the Big Show / Paul White at a special for Memphis Wrestling. And it was right after Paul White / Big Show left WWE for to try to heal, get better, and lose weight, which he did do when we saw him come back later. And was originally supposed to be him and Lawler, and so after that he wasn't seen again until he showed up at TNA. And that was his career in a way, and his run in TNA was people will say what they want to say about that run. I'm not going to go into deep dive in it on this episode because, like I said, I try to stay positive, but it's an interesting topic. It really is. And I'm gonna end this episode because it's not gonna be the longest episode. But I feel like Hogan does deserve his own episode slash me giving my thoughts. Honestly, because at the end of the day, he did have a family. They're hurt deeply about it. He had a lot of friends. He had his family that and my heart goes out to them because I know they're hurting very much. Um, and he did touch a lot of wrestling fans all over the world for so long, and a lot of us would not be here if it wasn't for him in a way. Not saying professional wrestling would not be here at all, but the landscape would be completely different to what we know it as, and we can't deny that. So with that saying, I want to thank everybody who does watch the stream, our podcast, or listen to our on all your favorite platforms. Um, the support is always appreciated. Much love to you all. I'll see you at episode number 19.